Everybody can hear me. I know everybody here can because I'm a loud jerk, but I'm assuming the people online can hear me. Hey, everybody. How y'all doing today? This is going to be a little bit of a weird presentation, other than the fact that it's me and I'm just weird by default, right? This is not really a slide deck. I've got like 3 or 4 or 5 slides, and we'll just go through them really quickly. But the reality is the majority of this talk is going to be driven by you, okay? One of the things, I've been doing this for a while. I'm a nerd from way back. I'll give you a little bit of an intro in a second, but I've got to give you some qualifiers for this presentation today. My primary job is breaking applications, right? I am a penetration tester. I'm an ethical hacker, a professional hacker, whatever you want to call it, okay? I am hired by companies to go in and test stuff, tell them where they're weaker, and then basically tell them their baby is ugly and go home. And the reality is all babies are ugly. We lie to new parents. We always, oh, the baby's adorable, blah, blah, blah. They're squishy. Their head is not completely connected. They have no kneecaps, right? It takes about 6 months for them to look like actual human beings. And I have kids, so I'm even talking about my own. We just lie. The reality is that's how applications are as well, right? We look at apps, we're like, oh man, that's great. I love what it can do. And then you realize it's really bad, okay? And what I find is that most people understand security is important at some level, right? But the problem is that most people think security is important, but I don't actually understand what it does, right? We think we do because we do, awareness training every year, right? How many people here go through awareness training every single year, right? How many people in their awareness training does it tell you not to click links, right? Don't click links. Links are bad, right? But your awareness training was delivered to you via an email that had a link that you clicked on to go to the awareness training, right? Like I've always laughed at this. It's like, what the hell are you doing? By the way, I also I have a small problem with cursing. So this talk will be PG-13. Just letting you know now. I will try not to drop too many F-bombs because people get upset by that. But I don't promise. But we do this training and we tell people not to click links, and then people click links, right? We tell developers to develop code securely, and then we have SQL injection in 2024, right? And we often will hear, well, those idiot developers or those stupid users, we hear this a lot. But the reality is that they're not idiots. They're not stupid. We have set systems up insecurely, right? We tell people not to click links, yet the majority of our business processes require them to do exactly what we told them not to do. We tell developers to build secure code, but when you look at the documentation from various companies, they teach you insecure code. I actually did a presentation, probably 15 years ago, where I went through all the Adobe documentation, the Microsoft documentation, the IBM documentation, the whatever, and grabbed their sample code that they actually put in the documentation and showed all of the security vulnerabilities that were in the documented example code. And when I reached out to these organizations and said, hey, Adobe, your documentation is actually insecure, their answer was, well, we don't expect people to use those examples we gave them, not in a production system. Well, then why is it an example, right? Like this is, and so what I have found, what I've realized is that the reality is most people don't actually understand what an attacker thinks, what an attacker looks at when they look at applications, right? And so that's today. We're going to talk about what one attacker thinks, me, right? When I look at something, what does it mean? Now, Jennifer is here. Jennifer's one of our senior consultants. I'm going to put her on the spot, right? Well, she's not here to present. She's actually going to be able to say what she thinks about stuff, right? And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask you for domain names. And we're going to go to random websites that you point us to. Now, I will ask, one, if I recognize the domain name and it's inappropriate, I'm not going, okay? Two, we all know what Goatee is. Don't send us there, okay? while it may be funny to rickroll us, it won't be helpful. Okay, so when you give URLs, when you give me domain names, we'll go from that perspective. Okay, don't. I mean, the temptation to screw around is probably great, but please don't do it. Okay, I am not going to hack these websites. We are planning on not going to jail today. That is the plan, right? Is to not have me get arrested. So what I'm going to do is we're going to browse to these websites in a way that my attorney has told me is okay. And notice I qualified it, right? My attorney said this is fine. And then we're going to talk about what we see. We're going to talk about what that means and how that could be used in an attack. Okay. And I have some sample applications that, worst case scenario, we can pull those up. But the whole point of this talk is to not use sample applications because those aren't very fun, right? So let's talk. Does that all make sense? Okay. Now, as we go through, I'm going to tangent and tell stories and talk about hacks we've done and everything else like that. I often forget a small pair of words when I tell stories. Like I'll say things like, well, when I was breaking into that bank and got into the vault, and I'll tell that story, and then I will forget the words with permission. Okay. So please do me the favor and add those words to any story I tell, because the reality is without permission, what we do is illegal, right? What we do is breaking the law. In no ands, ifs, or buts. We can argue about where the law lies, whether the law should be written the way it is. We can have conversations about whether the Second Amendment covers hacking back, whatever, right? But the reality is what we are talking about, if you steal $25 million from a bank, it doesn't matter if you did it with a gun at the teller or whether you did it via a web application, that's against the law, right? And so when I tell the story about stealing $25 million from a bank, add the words with permission. Does that make sense? Now, the other side of this, please ask questions. Please talk. Please be part of this presentation. This presentation will only be as exciting as you make it. Okay? So that's the point. Does that all make sense? Okay. So the reason we called this the Truman Show, other than the fact that I always tend to pick a movie or something to make talks about, the reason we call this the Truman Show is I actually believe this is how we handle most application security. When we talk about the Truman Show, the movie, the idea was this dude was in a setup, was filmed all the time, but he thought he was in the real world, right? Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie. But I think the movie came out in like 1783 or something, so you probably should have seen it or know what it is. Maybe not 1783, but something close to that. Yeah, no, it's okay. I feel older. And so the Truman Show came out. It was actually a dumb movie, but funny, right? And at one point, this dude realized he was living on a TV set. When we look at application security, I think most of us, please note I did not say developers, most of us live in a world where we think things are handled correctly. We think our data is secure, right? I had this conversation yesterday. So I'm currently working on moving into a house that I'm renting. I'm living in an apartment. I hate apartment living. Let's just say that when they threw the dude through the banister and had the cops come, that was the final straw for me to say, this is probably not the best apartment for me to live in. And so I'm moving. I'm moving this Friday. So I'm dealing with that, right? I signed the lease. I did all this kind of stuff. Yesterday, I'm sitting in the airplane. I'm actually in the plane waiting, everybody's boarding. And that takes forever because people don't know how to find seats. They're all in a row and labeled, but people get confused. And I get a phone call. And it's the company that owns the house that I'm moving into, right? And they offer a service. The service is, moving is stressful. And you don't know the best internet provider and trash can taker-upper or whatever. We can help you. And so you tell us what services you need, and we'll sign up for the service. This is what the dude is telling me over the phone. And I want to be clear. I know this is real, that this is not a scam, even though it sounds like a scam. Because when I talked to the company to get the lease, they actually said, this is what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. This is the process. And I had actually vetted the site and people before I got on this phone call. Just happened to be a weird phone call. So I get on with this guy and I'm like, yeah, I've got everything I need except internet. I need internet access. And I would like it to start on Friday when I move in because You may be surprised by this, but I like being connected. I'm a nerd, right? And so this dude says, okay, great. What do you blah, blah, blah. Here's your options. He says, you've got Xfinity and you've got AT&T fiber. I'm like, there is no way in hell I'm signing up for Xfinity, right? I know if I have a choice to not use Comcast, my choice is to not use Comcast, right? They are the worst company in the world. I have a strong opinion about this. Anybody here work at Comcast so I know who I'm making fun of? You do? Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm from Jacksonville. I now hate you. And sorry, man. So you don't work there anymore. What did you do there? Ah, nice. Very cool. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Comcast sucks. But so the guy says, no problem. We have AT&T fiber. And let me be very clear. I am probably going to be disappointed that AT&T is as bad as Comcast, but I've never used them for internet access, so I don't know, whereas I have used Comcast, so I do know. Sorry. But so the guy says no problem, and here's what they do. They send me a link to click on. I click on the link. It's their system, the homeowner system, right? And it starts asking me all of the questions that AT&T asks when you sign up. They are literally proxying the questions through their system. I say to the guy on the phone, do you understand how scammy and insecure this phone call feels? Right? And the only reason I know it was real because I already vetted it, right? But this dude's like, this isn't a scam. I said, you understand that a scammer would say that. He says, no, no, no. I know this isn't a scam because I'm doing it. Right? I'm sorry? Well, I won't say I vetted it completely to the point, but I vetted it to a point where I felt comfortable. I had talked to the owner of the house about the service, and they had given me the phone number it was going to call from, right? And I know that's spoofable. I know that it is possible that this could have been totally a scam, but I will also point out that every bit of data I gave this person is already on the internet anyways, so I'm not that worried about having it stolen. Does that make sense? But absolutely, I agree with you, and I will also point out that I immediately changed the password set to the account directly on the AT&T website after I set up all of this stuff because I had to do it through their system. But this is, the reality is, and by the way, good question. Yes. Why would I not do it directly? Because I was sitting in an airplane and needed internet, and this was easier, right? And since I don't care about the risk I took on, I was cool with doing this, right? Convenience trumps security. Every day, all the time. I'm a security person. I worry about security stuff. Notice I didn't say I'm paranoid. I hate the use of the word paranoid in this. We always say, oh, I'm a paranoid security person. No, paranoia is a mental illness. Let's not make it a joke, right? Just one of those things. But so we're going to do this. So let's go. Let's, I got to get right to the right window. Why is that not doing it? There we go. I'm Kevin. I won't do a long intro. I'm Kevin Johnson. I'm an OWASP board member. I'm the founder of Secure Ideas. We're a consulting firm. We do cool stuff. Does that make sense? I'm fanatical about open source. I've already talked about all of this. We're not going to do CTF exercises. We're going to talk about the way it works. So bio. This is a categorization, classification scheme. I'm sorry. Jason Gillum came up with this. The idea is to try to figure out how we classify flaws, right? And this starts with bypass, input manipulation, logic and timing, and exposure. All vulnerabilities fall within these four classifications somewhere, one or more of them, right? And we're going to use an interception proxy. That is what I'm using today to do this. Okay, and I'm going to show you that in a second. There are two primary interception proxies that people talk about, people know about. I'm going to use Burp today, not Zap. Now, I find this funny because normally I would say, I understand that Zap is a flagship project at OWASP, and I'm presenting to an OWASP chapter meeting, so I probably should use the flagship project. But OWASP no longer has Zap as a flagship project. That's a sore subject for many people, not me. But I'm going to use Burp. I'm going to point out that burp is a commercial tool. I am in no way saying that you should use burp. There is a free community edition that will do everything that we do today. Yes, I thought about that. Like a minute it came out of my mind. Wait a minute, is it? So everything we do today can be done with the free version. It can also be done with Zap. It can also be done with other tooling. The reason I'm using burp is the same reason I use Android, right? Personal preference. We can argue whether iOS or Android is better. The reality is they do the same damn thing, right? They're phone operating systems. Today, iOS may have a feature that Android doesn't have, and tomorrow Android will have that feature and a feature that iOS doesn't have, and then they'll go back and forth. The reality is, as much as we want to fan over one or the other of these operating systems, the reality is they are the same thing, and it's personal preference. Burp and Zap is the same thing. It's personal preference. Which do you like better, right? For me, I've used burp for longer than I've used any other interception proxy. And so I am most comfortable with the interface and how it works. That's it. Okay. So that's why we're going to use that. Does that make sense? Cool. So we're going to shut that off because there's no reason to keep it running. This is burp. This is an interception proxy. I find it funny that we focus on the term interception proxy because we do interception the least of any other feature inside the tool, right? The idea behind an interception proxy is we tell our browser to use this software as its proxy to the internet. And then this software is able to stop the request and let us manipulate it and then forward it on. And it's able to stop the response and let us manipulate it and then forward it on to the browser. But the reality is you almost never use that feature. The main thing you use the interception proxy for is to capture the communication between the client, whether it's a browser or some type of application, and the server side tooling and the response back. That's it. And then based on that capture, we're able to do things. So this is just the normal setup. It asks you some questions. Hey, do you want to do this? Whatever. We're going to save this as a temporary project in memory because, like I said, we are only going to use the features the free version gives you, even though this is the commercial version. I'm going to get rid of the error that says, hey, can you hear anything? Because I've actually muted my sound here so we don't have the loop going. And then you can actually set up some configurations. Just as an aside, this configuration thing is, if you wanted to do something that was set the same way every single time, you would have a file that would have that configuration, and you can actually use that back and forth. One of the things I recommend is if you're ever doing an assessment of an application, save out your configuration. And then when you give the results to the developers where they can do this, hand them the configuration you used, right? That way, they can mimic the same thing you did without any back and forth problems, right? Because our goal as people who are assessing stuff, our goal as a consultant, as an employee that works on this stuff, whatever, right? I work as a consultant, but when I worked as a full-time employee at a corporation, I did the same thing. Our job is not to hack stuff. It's actually kind of funny, right? Because when you talk to somebody who's a penetration tester, everybody fixates on the hacking part, right? Like, oh man, that was so cool. I got in, I broke that, I did this, I stole that, I did this cool shit. The reality is, our job is to make things better. And sadly, we can't hack you to being secure, right? Me doing a pen test does not make you more secure. Me finding a cool hack does not make you more secure. What makes you more secure is me giving you enough information that you can fix the right things, right? That's why we say to people all the time, they're not paying for, they're not hiring us to hack stuff. They're hiring us to write a cool report. I say cool to make myself feel better because it's never cool to write reports. Reports are boring, they suck, it's awful. It's the worst part of our job, but it's actually the most important part of our job. So we're going to say start. And now, of course, it waits. Do you ever notice that when you're demoing it, everything takes longer? Okay, so this is burp, and I'm not going to go through all of the different parts here. What we're going to do is we're going to come over here to the proxy tab. I'm trying to make this window a size that I can see everything without the zoom stuff floating around. Now, you'll notice that it says intercept is off. Remember I said that it is able to intercept the request, but I don't want it to. Okay. Now, as we do this, I'm going to show you some of the features. So I'm not going to, this is not a class to teach you burp, right? So I'm going to open the browser. I'm going to click that 2 or 3 times. It's going to give me an error. It's going to tell me there's an extension problem. That's an issue. Yeah, I know. I'm going to come in here and clear my cache because I realized I did not do that. There we go. Now, at this point, if I come out here to secureideas.com, just as an example, it loads. Now you'll notice, oh, we got to, do you know that this pop-up is the biggest thing that GDPR ever accomplished? It was to cause every website in the world to tell you about cookies. Now, in here, we're in the proxy tab, right? You'll notice that everything's in tabs. If I come in here to the HTTP history tab, I can actually see all of the requests and responses. And I just realized in the room, that's gonna be hard to see. So user interface, gotta remember where the font size is. Right here, thank you. Okay, there we go. Now, what we've got, I'm assuming you guys can read this, right? Everybody can see that? I know on Zoom you can because you can make it as big as you want to, but here in the room, is everybody cool? Okay, so the top of the screen is showing all of the requests and responses that it saw, right? And it's just a list. So here was the request for the initial page, right? And you'll see you've got the get request for /HP. We can see all of the headers that the browser sets, right? Now, right now, we're playing around with this. Most of these don't matter for what we're talking about. But you'll see we asked for a host header. We've got a user agent that tells the service what our browser is or what we want to identify as. But the main thing is this get request at the top. And then we get a response. We've got the HP2. So we know what version of the protocol the server is going to discuss this at, right? We're going to communicate. We've got a status code of 200 with a title of OK. So basically the service is saying, you asked for something. I'm giving you something. Please note, I did not say I'm giving you what you asked for, right? The service is just responding with this. Now we'll also notice that in the headers in the response, right? We've got some information. We've got the last modified date, the E tag, the cache control, blah, 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 blah. Don't care. Notice we have a content security policy that's defined. So that's interesting, right? CSP is not as common today as it should be, right? So that's something we would want to know. We've got this edge cache. I can't say it, but you can read it. That tells me that this site is probably behind some type of CDN or content distribution, might be behind some type of reverse proxy. Now, I happen to know that this site is behind a CDN because this site is hosted on HubSpot. And we know that HubSpot uses a CDN for their systems. Now, as somebody doing an assessment, as an attacker, what does being behind a CDN tell me I need to think about, right? Anybody? We might want to look where the origin servers are, right? That's important. Another thing that I like to see, yes, sir? Yep. So as a tester, that's a concern for me, right? This is behind a CDN, so I don't know if I have permission to actually test against this thing. From an attacker perspective, that's less of a concern, but it's a good thing to point out. Thank you. What I would think about as an attacker, both of these things are valid. Both of these are things I would think about. But the final thing I would think about is that most CDNs are hosting often static versions of the site, so less dynamic stuff to go after. We also, most CDNs today have some level of web app firewalling or some type of protection for the site behind them. They are actively trying to stop attacks, right? So when I think about it as an attacker, that's where the origin server comes into play, right? Is the origin server that's loading the CDN content that it's being loaded from, is it accessible to me? Can I get to that? Now, one of the ways to find that out is DNS, right? If we can do a zone transfer, or if we can brute force DNS, quite often you'll see things like www.securideas.com is one name and it goes out to HubSpot's CDN, right? But then you'll see something like www.1.securideas.com, or we actually see www-origin.securideas.com. By the way, neither of those two are real DNS names for securideas.com, but they're good examples that we see, right? And so then what we'll do is we'll try to get to that origin. Now, there's lots of other ways to find the origin servers. Yes, sir. So the question was, with DNS being so centralized so often, do I often find zone transfers being available? The answer is maybe. I know that's not a good answer to that one. Yes, we find very often, especially if we're on an internal network, that DNS zone transfers are still possible to happen, right? DNS zone transfers are not necessarily a security risk, because the reality is every piece of information that's in that DNS zone is accessible to an attacker given enough time and effort. We can brute force a zone transfer. How do we brute force a zone transfer? I have a word list, right? And that word list just asks for file name after name after name after name to see if they resolve it. We have lists out there, sec list. Dan Meisler, can't say his name, has released this. It's a great list. Jason Haddix has helped with the sec list project. SecList is an open source collection of lists for security testing, right? And they have great lists out there for brute forcing DNS zones, right? So we find the origin servers. But one of the things that we also know because of CDNs is that a lot of the stuff that came back from that server is CDN specific, not application specific. This is very similar to, and we'll see it in a second, you'll see the Google Analytics cookies that are being set, or the Google Analytics parameters that are being set. Attacking a Google Analytics parameter is not very useful to an attacker, right? Because that's not part of the app. That's part of the tracking for analytics. The same thing with this CDN. We happen to know, you guys might not know this, but HubSpot is a CRM, right? A client relationship management tool. It is designed to provide us information about our clients so we can track things, we can know when we open deals and stuff like that. And much of the HubSpot stuff that comes back, not interesting to an attacker, right? Now, from an attack perspective, though, now that we know it's HubSpot, do you know what that gets you as an attacker? If you could get a list of every single one of Securities' customers, wouldn't that be interesting to an attacker? Right? Guess where such a list exists? HubSpot, right? That's its entire purpose, is to contain that type of data. And that's sensitive data, right? Now, from a testing perspective, right, when you talked about can I attack that CDN, from a pen test perspective, if I'm attacking Secure Ideas, I probably don't have permission to attack HubSpot, right? But from an attacker perspective, I now have an entire login system that I can go after, right? Just by browsing to this website, I know we're on HubSpot. By the way, we know that because of some of the parameters that come back, right? I mentioned it that I know it, but right here. This HS cache config is a HubSpot cache, right? And I know that because I know we're using HubSpot, but all you do is put that into Google and it will tell you it's a header coming from HubSpot, right? It's that simple. We do a lot of lookups that way. We start looking at things, okay? So we've got this information coming back. We also have all of these, right? Even more HubSpot Hub ID. That just gave you that ID right there is our company ID within HubSpot. If you wanted to social engineer something, I don't recommend it. This would be illegal, potentially. Your lawyer may disagree with my lawyer. But when you call HubSpot for tech support, that ID that they pass down just by making a simple web request is part of the identification that they use to verify what company account you're using, right? Now, there's other information. I'm not going to pretend it's secret, right? But there's other information. But that piece of information that just came in, HS Hub ID, is actually a corporate ID inside of the HubSpot system for secure ideas, right? If you go register for a free account on HubSpot, which you can do, you will see that you're assigned a Hub ID. Every one of the URLs that you use to access data in the HubSpot system has the Hub ID in it to recognize that's how they pass back and forth the information, right? Make sense? From an attacker perspective, we now know where the CDN is. We know whether the backend CRM is, and we already know at least one place for critical sensitive data for secure ideas just by browsing to a website, right? Kind of fun. I don't know. I find it fun. Okay, so then we have all the other requests and responses, right? So we see that secureideas.com accesses all of this information. Now we have the Google Analytics stuff. We have the banner, more Google Analytics. We have the double click thing, which I find absolutely hilarious, is still out there because we don't use double click. This is actually part of one of the analytics softwares that is there, and it bothers me. You've got the Zoom info stuff, and then back to the beacon for performance. Okay, so anybody want to give me a URL to start with? Facebook. Oh, Facebook sucks. I'm sorry? Interpol. Yeah. OWASP.org. This one is actually kind of funny because when you come here, let's say search, test, right? We get back our results. When you come back to OWASP, what, are we laughing that it's command injection? Which, by the way, it's 2024. We should not have command injection flaws. But we do. Right? Jennifer said, just to be clear, got one last week, right? Okay, so here's OWASP, right? And here's the response back. Now, one of the things to understand about the OWASP website, and this goes back to the same thing, right? Notice right there, the content security policy. The content security policy is designed to allow various other sites to be considered part of the same origin, right? So what interesting site do you see up there? GitHub. The entire OWASP website is a GitHub page, or GitHub pages, right? The entire thing. What does that tell you? It's mostly static, right? It's mostly static, but there is an API that you can interact with. And it does mean that if you get commit rights to the repo that the pages are pulled from, you can change the content of the OWASP website, right? Now, I say that about OWASP not to tell you to attack them, but do you know how many organizations use GitHub to host their sites? Right? Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure it's billions and billions, but let's go with it, right? It's a lot. It's more than 10, less than billions and billions, somewhere in the middle, right? It's like a Comcast tech support appointment. But, sorry, man. So I'm full of dumb jokes. My favorite joke, do you guys know why Walmart wasn't hacked? They're not a target. And I actually got to introduce the CISO of Walmart at an event, and I told that story, that joke, and he would not shake my hand. What the heck, right? You got the good side of the joke. Yeah, I think so, right? So with GitHub, we know that if we logged into the GitHub account, we could commit code. Not only do we know that we would have to attack the account, but there's another way to do it. What is one of the best ways to get code into a project under GitHub? Pull request. So we go out to the OWASP repository, we fork it, we do our changes, and then we submit it as a pull request. And if we do it right, and it gets approved, our content is now on the OS website. I mean, we would never do something malicious that way. Wasn't that just recent? Yeah, XE. I'm sorry? Do we have unit tests on the OS website? You would have to ask the people that manage the OS website whether or not they have unit tests. I am not said person. I do manage my project's web pages. And my answer at that point is no, the Samurai project does not have unit tests. We just commit right to production. I got no problem admitting it. The Git history is right there. If I lied to you and told you we did unit tests, you'd be like, oh, but Kevin, right? Okay. So let's use a site that we can register for an account. Anybody? I'm sorry? Intuit.com. ESPN. You can register for an account on ESPN.com. I don't know stuff. Yeah, I am not a sports person. Okay, so I came out here. Oh, you're right here. Create an account. You're getting me to attack Disney. I forgot Disney owned this. Well played, sir. Well played. Okay, so none@none.com. I could try to spell that correctly. Continue. Enter your current password. So I'm not even in burp right now. Can anybody tell me the interesting thing we just found? That user ID exists, right? We have username harvesting. We don't have half the username. We have exactly the full username. Right? But yeah, so the gentleman in the back said, how can we be sure? And the gentleman next to him said, the bold word, right? Like, but I will point out, the gentleman next to you is wrong. Yes, this implies highly that that account exists, but it doesn't mean it absolutely does. How do we find out whether or not it really exists? Right. This gentleman just said it correctly. He said, I'm sorry? Right. He's like, you find one that doesn't exist. Right? So the one that I always use, and if you're ever hiring security for a pen test, this would screw me up, right? XYZZY at secureideas.com. That's how we know it's username harvesting. But it's an excellent question. Thank you very much. What we know is that XYZZY, which is the dumb username that I use when I'm testing something to not exist, because that tends to not exist, right? We saw a different response. So now I want to be very clear. This is actually an unfair flaw, right? So we are saying this is a username harvesting flaw. As an attacker, I can enumerate all of the valid, or potentially enumerate all of the valid usernames on this site, right? Now, what can I do with that? Because the person in the back said, but that's only half of what you need. Yes, it is true. It is only half of what I need. May even only be 1/3 if they're using MFA, right? I don't have the password. So how would I get the password for these accounts? The dark web. God, I hate that phrase. The part of the internet we turned off the lights. But Marketing wins, it's the dark web. That's one place, the dark web. We can go out to something like flare.io, which is a system I use to find out if there has been a breach that contains the credentials for none@none.com. Now that I've said that out loud, it sounds stupid, right? But I can find out if the credentials have leaked. I can find out if other credentials have leaked and tried it. I could brute force this password, right? Or I could just ask the user, right? I can email them, pretend to be from ESPN, pretend to be from Disney, right? Because I know they actually have an account here. So I've already escalated the trust the person has with me because they legitimately, unlike, and we know this is still successful, I regularly get phishing emails that are from Bank of America. The subject line says Chase and the body says American Express. And we know those phishing emails are successful, but I would like to believe I would not fall for one. A Frankenstein, like American Express, Chase, and Bank of America have gotten together to reset your password. But I don't know, weird shit happens, right? But as an attacker, I'm going to email this person, pretend to be from my Disney, and say, hey, there's a problem with your account. Could you please click below to fix it? And nobody wants to lose access to their Disney account. It's the happiest place in the world, right? Except for Comcast, who apparently hates Disney. They're too happy over there. We need to be miserable, right? So now we have username harvesting. Now, I say this isn't a fair flaw because I said it's potential. Here's why it's potentially a flaw. Let me ask you a question. If you're an application, you're designing an application, you're building a system, right? And somebody goes to register an account and they're using a user ID, in this case, an email, that is already in use. What's the right thing from a business perspective to do? Do you let them register the account? Now you have two accounts that have the same email address. That's weird. Do you reject them the way this one did and say, hey, by the way, you already have an account. Why don't you use that password, right? Or do you silently drop the registration? Now you have a frustrated user, right? What do you do? So this is a username harvesting flaw that doesn't have a good, obvious solution, right? So you believe that I'm going to repeat, I'm not arguing, I'm asking. You believe that the right way to fix this is to require both the username and the password together to be unique. And so for somebody to recover their password, their account, they would have to know both the username and password? But what you're describing is logging in. So what do you do on the creation page? I go to the creation page, I type my email address in, that account already exists. So what does the creation page do? I haven't provided a different password. All I've done is put a username in. Except it does, I have username harvesting. No, I now have a place to sign up for an account. Do you have me sign up for the account and then if I use a different password, you reject it? I'm not sure I follow is the problem. I'm not. You're saying, okay, so you're saying I should accept the account, and if the password is the same as the other one, then they just created the same account and I let them in. And if it's different, I create a new account. Okay, but now I have two accounts for Kevin@secureideas.com. How do I do forgot my password? We don't do any forgot my password. Okay, remember I qualified this with a solution the business will accept. Right? I didn't exactly say that, but I said, what's the right solution that will work for the business? So there's a popular website that doesn't let people reset their passwords? Oh, what site is this? You talking about Glassdoor? Okay, okay. So the solution that I would recommend, two-factor authentication won't prevent username harvesting. That's one way. So when they get to this point, when you type in the username, don't present a display at all. Don't blah, 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 blah. It's a good thing speaking is part of my job. Don't present a form at this point. Tell the person, hey, to create this account, we've sent you an email that has a link for you to come back or a code for you to come back, right? And then you finish your registration at that point. And then that way, if there really is an account already, that email doesn't give them a new registration. It says, hey, you just attempted to create a new account. Small mistake, we already have an account for you. Why don't you reset your password, right? And the attacker shouldn't have access to that email, right? So that's good. That's one solution. I will tell you that a lot of businesses hate that solution, and I don't know why. I disagree with them because I think it's the right solution, right? But there's people who believe that the right way to handle this is to immediately give the person, give them the form, let them go do this. And the reason they don't want to go, my understanding, and I want to be clear, I'm repeating at this point, I am not agreeing. Does that make sense? So what they say is that when somebody comes to the site and types in a username to get there, right, they are going to say, oh, I'm busy right now. I'm not going to go. You're actually sending them over to email to then come back. You'll lose. I've heard numbers as high as 80% of registrations at that point. I don't know that that's real. Though, like 83.6% of all statistics are made up on the spot. But that's a business problem. So if they won't accept that, because that's actually, in my opinion, the right solution. But if they won't accept that, what you do is you build into the system, because here's what the attacker is going to do if they're harvesting usernames. You don't harvest one username, right? I'm going to have a script that's going to put in 10,000 usernames or 1 million usernames. So what happens is after the third time or whatever number you pick, right? I get to this point and I'm like, okay, got one. Go back, try again, go back, try again, go back, try again. At the point where I've tried 3 or 4 times, which by the way is not normal. If a user comes and puts in an email address that exists, it is very unlikely that they're going to go back and put a different email address in. Oh, that account exists. I want to build a new account, right? That's not very common. The other thing that we know of is if somebody puts an email address that doesn't exist, they don't tend to go back and try a different one, right? So behavioral analysis tells me that if somebody puts 2 or 3 unique email addresses into this form, not this one, the previous one, that's an attacker, block them. Or slow down your application, right? Start responding slower. So while they can harvest, they don't harvest as much. And then you react. Does that make sense? Well, from an attacker perspective, I'm gonna be like, ooh, I wonder what I can do here. So let's. Yeah.
That this is the solution that you're recommending is essentially the magic key authentication that's becoming more common?
It can be, yes. Okay, so and is not a commonly used password. It does not like my password. My password is password 1.
So Kevin, we have about 5 minutes left. Back to your other what you're pointing out, a lot of I know commercial sites are doing that with the DDoS kind of concept of login sites and things like that. They'll do those like they'll limit the number from a particular IP, but you can still do it off of truly distributed attacks.
Absolutely.
But local attacks, they'll say, hey, you've only hit it 5 times in a row, come back later, type thing.
By the way, password 123 is a great password according to the ESPN password analysis. Right now, this is actually kind of cool. We can't go further because we have to get a code from an email address, and I'm not loading my email to get that code. Not on the screen streaming to Zoom. Right? That's not sensitive at all. Right? So what we're trying to do is start looking at this stuff. And what I want you to think about, let's say I totally got 5 more minutes. What I want you to start thinking about is when you look at stuff, the concept is not what is the worst case scenario. Okay, we as InfoSec do worst case scenario way too often, right? We are the Chicken Little industry. The sky is falling, the world is ending. What was the Die Hard movie that had the fire sale where the attackers were going to shut power down and satellites were going to fall onto the earth or something? Because that's what happens. If you hack the satellite, it falls out of the sky, right? It's just weird. The reality is we have to think about what the business needs. And then what can an attacker do that the business is worried about? And I say the business might be a corporation. The business might be you. The business, we're talking about, like, what is your worry? What keeps you up at night? Because we suck at risk analysis. We in general, people suck at risk analysis. Do you know how I know people suck at risk analysis? Discovery Channel has a Shark Week. Seriously. Do you understand that more people are killed by soda machines? And I mean the soda machine actually falling on them, not giving them diabetes, right? More people are killed by soda machines every year than are bitten by sharks, right? But people are afraid of sharks. I was in Denver for Snowfrock last year, and I asked the audience, how many people here are afraid of sharks? I'm like, half, 3/4 of the audience raised their hand. Like, no. I don't mean like, oh man, sharks. I mean actively afraid of sharks. Oh my God, a shark could bite me at any time. And like half the room kept their hand up. And I pointed out that they lived in a city a mile above sea level. The only chance they had, in my opinion, of getting bitten by a shark was if somebody was transporting a shark from an aquarium to another aquarium and they rammed the truck, right? I will point out that somebody corrected me later. They came up to our booth and they told me that I was wrong. And I was. I will admit this. I was wrong. There is another opportunity in Denver to get bitten by a shark. There is an aquarium there that you can pay to swim with sharks. So it's possible to get bitten, but you actually paid to be bitten, I guess, right? So, but this is the problem, right? People are afraid of sharks, but the reality is, look, I live in Florida. I was born and raised in Florida. I've lived there my entire life. Do you know what chance I have of getting bitten by a shark? Anybody tell me? I live by the beach. Smaller than getting bitten by a python, smaller than getting hit by an iguana that fell out of a tree, right? Or a gator. Do you know how to tell if there's a gator in the water in Florida? You put your hand in the water. You pull your hand out of the water. If it's wet, there's a gator in that water, right? I have 0% chance of getting bitten by a shark in Florida. Do you know why I have 0% chance? I don't go in the water. That's their home. I'm a nerd. I don't go outside, right? We have to understand risk. We have to understand the things we're actually worried about. And my recommendation is, if you're not in charge of your organization, if you're not the boss, if you're not whatever, go ask the boss what keeps her up at night. What is their biggest concern? If you're in a company large enough to have different teams and things like that, go meet with the teams. Find out what they're worried about. And I mean actually worried about, not they saw it on CNN or Fox News. Okay? Because I don't care which of the two you're watching, they both suck. What actually keeps them up at night? Now, once you know what actually keeps them up at night, look at the applications you're responsible for, the applications that you have access to, the applications that you, and figure out if that application would provide an attacker a path to that concern. Right?
One more real quick question.
Yeah.
I feel like we can scrape the surface, but from what I see, Burp is not revealing anything that regular browser monitoring does not, or does. Is the configuration / setup the advantage of the tool, logging?
That's an excellent question. So the reality is, you're right. We're just touching the surface. Burp is not necessary for what we were doing. And that's because I don't want to cross the line and actually attack a website. So for example, with that username harvesting thing, remember I said that I could brute force the usernames and harvest lots of usernames to see if the site was actually vulnerable to that? I would use the tool in Burp called Intruder to set up that request. We're not going to do that, right? Any type of fuzzer that's built in. We also get, you're absolutely right, we get logging The other reason I like this better than the developer console or the developer tools is because I'm able to focus on exactly what I'm interested in. The developer tools work great. You absolutely can get all the information I've shown you so far from the developer tools. But the developer tools is also going to do tons of other things that I don't need it to for what I'm doing. So does that make sense to whoever asked that question? Any other questions before we wrap up? Well, that was easy. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy yourself. I hope to see you at the next meeting.
Thank you, Kevin. Awesome job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin will be around in the room, I guess, a little bit longer, but thank you. Thank you for doing the great presentation, and hopefully everyone else will join us next month for OWASP Boston speaking. I'm not even sure who's speaking, but we have another speaker next month. So same place, last Tuesday of the month. See y'all then.